Well, first of all, I would like to start with a comparison I know you don't like. I heard you say that, talking about the 2020 crisis, that it's not a different crisis, but it's an escalation of the crisis that started in 2008. How so? I mean, what does it have to? What does a crisis that was induced by the measures of to contain a virus have to do with the crisis that was started by financial products, by subprime mortgages, and so on? What's the link? Why is it an escalation?
Coronavirus is, part of nature. It's exogenous to our economy, but nevertheless, it has hit our economies very harshly at a time when capitalism, especially European capitalism, has been in an extended period of stagnation. Just like a human body can deal very, very differently with a virus when there is an existing condition, as opposed to when there isn't an existing condition. The existing condition of European capitalism has weakened our capacity to absorb the shock of COVID-19. If you think about it, from 2008 onwards, we have been in a kind of what Larry Summers, the American economist and former US Treasury Secretary, refers to as secular stagnation. I put it differently from Larry in terms of having I'll use a very simplistic term, socialism for the financial sector. That is a financial sector that is kept boisterous and happy by means of public money, and sheer austerity and low levels of investment for almost everyone else, including large companies. Yeah. So that stagnation was happening before COVID-19 hit. The result was that in proportion to total available money, liquidity, the rate of investment, even in the developed world, has never been so low in the history of capitalism. So low levels of investment, especially in the green jobs, good quality jobs that we need, means what? Means that the majority of people out there were already in a precarious situation. So when you've got this symmetric hit of demand and supply by COVID-19, governments are already feeling weak and incapable of dealing with the stagnation that has been going on for 12 years now. So what do? They do more of the same. The central banks print more money, they give it to the financial sector. The financial sector then, fearing that the little people out there, even large companies, will not be able to return the money by doing good capitalistic things, what they do is the financiers simply use the money in order to buy back their own shares. So the stock exchange continues to decouple from a degenerating capitalism. Therefore, it's a mistake to see this as a new crisis, simply because, of course, the hit that we received is new. It's an exogenous hit coming from our biology or from nature. But the crisis is going to be seen by future historians as an escalation of something that began in 2008.
I'll go back to the immediate measures, just going to a broader picture. In your latest book, Another Now, you try to imagine alternatives to capitalism, and you describe an alternative present or a different future. Could you describe for us, how does it look like?
Before I do that, it's important to mention that this is an intellectual exercise which is independently of COVID-19. I started doing it years before COVID-19.
But you mention the pandemics in the book also.
Because it is interesting to see how a different socioeconomic system would deal with this same crisis. Okay, but let me now answer your question. You see, to put it bluntly, what I try to do is to answer the question, can we have a market economy without capitalism? Because most people make the mistake, in my view, of identifying capitalism with markets, with competitive markets. When in reality, come to think of it, we have exactly the opposite now. Amazon has no competitor. Amazon is like a super state. It owns the infrastructure. It's not just a monopolist. It owns, the whole framework, the whole platform in which people, same with Facebook. The moment you enter Facebook, you exit capitalism. You are inside something that could be like the Soviet Union, one hierarchy, one structure, one ideology, one way of doing things. If you step out of line, your account is frozen. So we don't really have markets. Markets have been depleted. They've been shoved aside. Financial markets are not real markets. Financial markets are doing a lot of damage to markets. If you go out there now, even in Switzerland, you will see that, the baker, the brewer, the butcher, who were, according to Adam Smith, the archetypal capitalists, right? They're suffering. They have all their business taken away by large chains that are completely kept alive by state-produced, central bank-produced money. So we don't have even capitalism now. We have something I call techno-feudalism. So I'm trying to imagine, okay, what would it take to revive democracy and markets simultaneously? And the answer I come up with is the end of capitalism. By that, I mean the end of share markets, the end of the idea that, there are people out there who we don't know who they are, who own companies that own other companies that own other companies that then own the company in which we work. And we don't even know who are the real bosses of the companies in which we work are. Okay. So imagine if you had a situation where you go to the root of the problem, which is ownership. Who owns what? And who works for whom? So imagine instead of having commercial banks out there that have a capacity to create money out of thin air, you and I do not have the capacity to create money, but UBS, since you are in Switzerland, has the capacity to create money, and they only get this because the state is backing them. Imagine that we bypass them. Imagine that the Bank of Switzerland, the Central Bank of Switzerland, were to give you a bank account, to give everybody a bank account. Free bank account, digital bank account. It's very easy to do, just like that. Suddenly, you wouldn't need to have an account with UBS. And imagine at the same time that the company you work for gives you one share in the company. Like you have one vote when you vote in a referendum in the canton in which you live, or in Switzerland generally, or in the elections, right? And when you move from one company to another, you take your capital with you and you take your vote. Now, that would be a perfectly democratic and market-based economy. It wouldn't be communal. It would not be.
Yes, sorry, but who would lend the money to the companies? Right now, it's commercial banks who do that. Let's say I'm a big company, I need money. Who would lend it to me if the commercial banks are bypassed?
You would. Anyone with savings. The whole idea is that we would use our central bank account in order to accumulate our savings. Also, at birth, a trust fund for every baby, as I say in the book. Every baby gets born, has 100,000 euros or Swiss franc or dollars, whatever, that they can't use until they're 18, 20. They have to have a business plan that they submit. In the same way that, when you're an academic in a university, you have to submit a research proposal to get money to do your research. Similarly, when you're 18, you can submit a proposal to a committee of peers. It doesn't have to be the state. It can be, a group of randomly selected citizens that decide whether your business plan is any good. They could be business people themselves. And then you can take this money and you can use it either to lend it to a company that you think is doing good stuff, or hopefully to the company that you work for. So, let's go back to the basics, because most people out there think that money lent by banks comes from savings. It doesn't. It's conjured up from thin air. And this is why there are these tsunamis of capital that, flock towards certain companies. Their share prices go hugely through the roof. Look at Tesla, for instance, today, right? And then these bubbles then burst, creating a lot of problems. Then they need to be bailed out by you. So imagine that, you know, we went to something like another now, what I'm describing, then you would go back to the original idea, which was never actually reality, that people's savings are used in order to enable people to do stuff in their businesses, to invest in businesses.
Going back to the immediate, to the narrower picture, what immediate measures would be needed to get out of this crisis, in your opinion? Feasible immediate measures.
The one thing I would do immediately is cut out the middleman. At the moment, you have suffering economies and central banks. And central banks print money so that suffering economies, whether they're small businesses, larger businesses, families, you know, can make ends meet during this pandemic. But the problem is that we have a middleman now. The middleman is the commercial bank. So the central bank gives the money to the commercial bank, lots of money, at negative interest rates. So effectively, they pay them to take the money from the central bank, minus 0.5, minus 0.8% of interest rate. And then, you know, UBS, since I used UBS, I will continue using UBS or Deutsche Bank or Societe Generale, doesn't matter which one, HSBC, you know, these large banks, then they look at you and they say, no, we're not going to give it to him. He's not trustworthy. I mean, how's he going to repay a large loan? No, so they pick up the phone, they call a large company like Volkswagen, which has already a stash of cash, which is not using, because Volkswagen is too worried to invest all its money, because it looks out there at little people and say, oh, they don't have enough money to buy new cars. So those large companies take the money from the large banks, but not to invest it, because they're too scared. So what they do is they buy back their own shares. So Volkswagen buys Volkswagen shares, Apple buys Apple shares. And so, you know, all this economic activity, energy that is printed by the central banks is wasted. So when you put a middleman, the commercial bank between central banks and the people, it's wasted. You create more inequality, you poison the water rather than provide more water to those who are thirsty. So I would cut them out. And the way to cut them out is twofold. There are two ways of doing it. The first way is to have a public investment bank. I mean, the Europeans have the European Investment Bank, for instance, right? That issues bonds that then rich people can buy because they need to buy something. They don't know where to put their money at the moment. If you're very rich, you have no idea where to do your money. So the public investment bank can issue bonds. The rich people will want to buy them, and they will buy them, especially if the central bank announces that, you know, if needs be, they will be buying those bonds in the secondary market. That way, the public investment bank, the European Investment Bank, it can be a Swiss one, it could be KfW in Germany, right? They have a large pot of money to invest in the green, good quality jobs that we need to save the planet and to create good jobs for young people. So that goes directly there, you see? So you avoid the middleman, and you avoid the money going straight into the stock exchange. So that's one thing you can do. And the second thing you can do is, just a universal basic dividend. Give 2,000 euros, 2,000 Swiss francs to everyone. And then at the end of the year, if they're rich, you can tax them. And the state gets it. But, there's no bureaucracy involved in that. Everybody gets it. There's no stigma attached to getting it. Everybody gets it. It's a dividend for everyone. And then people can go out there and help the local shops. So these are two things you can do in order to cut the middleman out. I will do it tomorrow morning.
Regarding what happened until now, we saw most governments tried to find a balance between public health, the economy, and they had to deal with the weak social system sometimes, or a social system that was put under stress. Is there a perfect balance for you? And which one is it?
Well, when you are facing a disaster, there is no perfection, of course. All the solutions are going to be imperfect. But what we do know is that the dilemma between saving the economy and saving people is false. Countries that tried to save the economy ended up, with large death tolls and huge hits on the economy. So this is a dilemma that we now know is false. Secondly, we know that the countries and the communities that manage to do better in protecting both our health and our economy are the ones that provide it for people sufficiently so they can stay in isolation. When you have somebody who needs to go out there and work under unhygienic conditions, because if they don't, they will starve, then it is impossible to actually clamp down and to have the isolation that is necessary, and to impose upon employers who need to keep functioning, right? The stringent standards that we need for protecting the health of the workers. Because if employers can get desperate people to work under desperate circumstances, they don't need to invest in hygiene. Look at Amazon warehouses. People who work in Amazon warehouses simply have no choice. If they don't do it, they will starve. And therefore, Amazon does not need to provide them with any serious protection against the COVID-19. So you end up with more infections and more precarity and more exploitation. So support people.
We started with the crisis. I want to close, or almost, with going back to the crisis, to the debt crisis. That, I mean, you know very well, as your work as finance minister. Did the EU change course since then? I mean, we saw now lots of QE, lots of buying debt and so on. Did they somehow admit that they were wrong back then? Did they change course? What happened?
Well, they changed course with the appointment of Mario Draghi. Remember? It was end of 2011, beginning of 2012, Mario comes in and starts saying, we'll print money. He prints, gives it all to the banks, the TLRO, and then at some point he managed to convince Berlin to buy government debt in 1st of March 2015. And ever since then, they've been doing this. So it's not now they've changed their course. If Mario Draghi had not done that, the euro would have gone. It would have collapsed. There's no doubt about that. Now, unfortunately, what they never did was to move beyond socialism for the financiers. So Mario Draghi created socialism for the financiers that saved the financial markets and saved the euro. But austerity for the many continued and continues to this day. What the EU has done during this pandemic is it has proven quite adept at propaganda. They created the so-called recovery fund with a big sounding number of 750 billion euros. The reality is 300 billion, not 750. It's very small compared to the amount of macroeconomic injection that the EU needs, the Eurozone needs, in order to defend itself against the tidal wave of the recession. It's only 1/10 of what was necessary, at best. This is a good case scenario. But they managed to dress it up as a fantastic intervention. I suppose 1/10 is better than zero, but still it's quite minuscule. And I very much fear, we're already seeing that this is yet another crisis, or a phase of the same crisis, from which the European Union emerges weaker and more defeated than either China or the United States of America.
I have a very last question from the students regarding your ride, your motorbike. Is it a German one?
No, it's a Japanese one, of course. It's a Yamaha. The Japanese make the best bikes these days.
Thank you very much, Mr. Varoufakis.